Rain slashed across the Maple Bridge, transforming the asphalt into a slick, treacherous mirror. Inside the newsroom miles away, an anchor was already reading the breaking report: a devastating collision on the bridge tonight, caused by a suspected drunk driver crossing into oncoming traffic. But for the 4 souls caught in the wreckage, there was no news report. There was only the deafening screech of tires, the horrific crunch of bending steel, and then, a suffocating silence. Min Jun lay pinned against the steering wheel of his ruined sedan, his usually bright, playful eyes clouded with blood and shock. He forced his heavy head to turn. In the passenger seat, Soo-hyun, his childhood friend, the girl who had loved him in secret, the girl he had fiercely protected as a sister, was perfectly still. Her beautiful face was untouched, but the unnatural angle of her neck told a story his mind refused to accept. In the other vehicle, a crumpled mass of silver, the tragedy mirrored his own. Harry Parker, the man with a heart of gold, was gone on impact, shielding his wife until his last breath. Beside him, Siyerra was bleeding, her chest barely rising, trapped in the twisted wreckage of the life she had just begun to build. 2 lives extinguished in an instant. 2 left lingering in the dark. The sterile beep of a heart monitor was the first thing Min Jun registered. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and iodine. His body felt like it had been crushed under a boulder, every breath a jagged shard of glass in his ribs. Nurses hovered, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Through the haze of morphine, the truth filtered in. Soo-hyun was dead. The playful CEO of the Jun conglomerate, raised with everything but a mother's gentle touch, had lost his closest confidant. And Siyerra? She was somewhere in this building, fighting for her life. The news of her husband's death hadn't reached her yet. Min Jun closed his eyes, unable to face the stark, white ceiling. The physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight in his chest. As the medication pulled him under, the sterile walls dissolved, replaced by the vivid, painful colors of a past he could not undo. The flashback pulled him under, carrying him to a time before the metal, before the blood, before the rain.
And
6 months earlier, Min Jun hated routine inspections, but as the heir to the Jun conglomerate, visiting the foundation's educational facilities was part of the job. He had been strolling through the courtyard of the academy, his usual boyish charm deflecting the nervous energy of the school administrators, when he heard it. A laugh. Rich, warm, and entirely uninhibited. He stopped in his tracks. There, under the shade of a weeping willow, sat Siyerra. She was surrounded by a dozen captivated students. The sunlight caught the deep, beautiful brown of her skin and the brilliant white of her smile. She was listening intently to a frustrated student, her expression shifting from radiant joy to profound, empathetic understanding in an instant. Time stopped. For a man who had grown up with the fierce, protective love of a single father but a gaping void where a mother's softness should have been, Siyerra was a revelation. She was breathtaking. In that single, eternal moment, Min Jun felt an unfamiliar warmth flood his chest. He was utterly, helplessly captivated. For the next few weeks, Min Jun found every excuse to be at the school. The playful, adorable CEO suddenly became very invested in educational philanthropy. He approached her smoothly, masking his intense fascination with his natural charisma. They became friends. Siyerra was easy to talk to, kind, sharply intelligent, and completely unintimidated by his wealth. When they spoke, the crushing weight of his legacy vanished. Soo-hyun had noticed the shift in him. She had smiled through the pain, hiding her secret crush behind sisterly teasing, warning him not to play games with the teacher's heart. But Min Jun wasn't playing. He was drowning. He wanted Siyerra's warmth to fill the cold, empty spaces of his sprawling mansion. He wanted her light. The courtyard was empty when he finally made his move. He had arranged for a spectacular display of flowers, an elegant setting that matched his polite, perfectly rehearsed proposal. He didn't just ask her out, driven by a desperate, overwhelming need, he asked her to marry him. Siyerra looked at him, her dark eyes wide with shock, then softening with a profound, gentle pity. Min Jun, she said softly, stepping back from the extravagant ring. You are a wonderful friend. But I can't. She held up her left hand, where a modest, beautiful band rested. I'm engaged. I am deeply in love with Harry. The rejection didn't just break his heart, it fractured his reality. The deep-seated abandonment issues, the lack of female love he had harbored since childhood, flared into a sudden, toxic fire. He didn't just feel rejected, he felt replaced. Jealousy was an ugly, unfamiliar coat, and Min Jun wore it poorly. He needed to see this Harry Parker. He found him outside a modest financial firm. Harry was handsome, laughing brightly at something on his phone. He was an orphan who had built his life from scratch. He adored Siyerra. He was the kind of man who would playfully tease her just to see her smile when she was upset, and he treated Siyerra's mother with the reverence of a devoted son. Their love was undeniable, built on a foundation of mutual respect and joy. Min Jun approached him in a quiet cafe. Driven by a desperate, misguided fury, Min Jun slid a check across the table. It was a sum large enough to buy an island. Leave her, Min Jun said, his voice trembling with a dark, unfamiliar edge. Walk away, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. Harry looked at the check, then up at the billionaire. There was no anger in Harry's eyes, only a quiet, unshakable strength. He slid the check back across the table. You can't buy the sun, Mr. Lee, Harry said calmly. And you certainly can't buy my wife. Keep your money. Secrets are fragile things, and Harry and Siyerra kept none from each other. The very next day, Min Jun's office doors burst open. Siyerra stood there, shaking with an anger he had never seen in her before. The gentle, empathetic teacher was gone, replaced by a fierce protector of her own family. How could you, she demanded, her voice echoing in the cavernous, quiet office. You thought you could buy my husband? You thought my love was something you could bid on? Siyerra, I just wanted. You wanted to own me, she cut him off, her eyes blazing with disappointment. Harry is 10 times the man you are. You have all the money in the world, Min Jun, but you know nothing about love. She turned on her heel. Don't ever contact me again. As the heavy oak doors slammed shut, Min Jun was left in total silence. The flashback faded, pulling him back to the agonizing reality of the hospital room, the sterile beeping, and the devastating knowledge that the man he had tried to buy was dead, and the woman he had loved was broken, and it was entirely, hopelessly too late to make it right. The sterile walls of the hospital room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. Days bled into nights, measured only by the changing shifts of nurses and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of the machines keeping Min Jun alive. His body was a map of agony, fractured ribs, a shattered leg, and bruises that painted his pale skin in violent shades of purple and black. But the physical torment was a mere shadow compared to the ache in his chest. Siyerra. The name was a silent prayer on his cracked lips. He begged the nurses for news, pleaded with his father's doctors to wheel his bed down the corridor to her room. But his condition was too precarious. He was anchored to the bed, trapped in a motionless shell while the woman he loved lay injured somewhere beyond his reach. Denied the reality of seeing her, his feverish mind sought refuge in the past. But his memories offered no comfort, they were a punishing loop of his own making. The walls of the hospital dissolved, replaced by the lush, sun-drenched gardens of an estate he had no right to be at. The wedding day. He had parked his black sedan a quarter-mile away, hidden beneath the canopy of old oak trees. Through the tinted glass, he had watched it unfold. Siyerra looked like a vision in white lace, her smile outshining the midday sun. And there stood Harry Parker, looking at her as if she were the only woman in the universe. When they exchanged vows, Min Jun felt as though ice water had been injected into his veins. The pain was physical, a sharp, twisting agony that clawed at his throat. He had watched her slip away, radiating a pure, untouchable happiness that he could never give her. The wedding had been the catalyst for his descent. The flashback shifted, dragging Min Jun into the dark, stifling evenings of his sprawling penthouse in the weeks that followed. The playful, adorable CEO had vanished, replaced by a ghost who sought solace at the bottom of a crystal decanter. His assistant, trembling with anxiety, had cancelled board meetings, charity galas, and inspections. Min Jun was drowning, and there was only one person who refused to let him go under. Soo-hyun. She had stayed by his side, an unwavering sentinel of patience. He remembered the sting of her cool washcloth against his flushed, drunken face. He remembered sprawling on his velvet sofa, the room spinning, as he slurred Siyerra's name over and over into the empty air. "Why not me, Hyuna?" he had muttered, his eyes glazed with unshed tears. "Why him?" Soo-hyun had merely stroked his hair, swallowing her own silent heartbreak. "Because hearts are stubborn things, Min Jun," she had whispered, her voice a calm, pacifying melody in his chaotic world. She loved him enough to clean up his messes, to protect his reputation, and to endure the agony of watching him break over another woman. When he was sober, his obsession only morphed into something quieter and more desperate. He remembered the secretive afternoons, sitting in the back of his chauffeured car, watching Siyerra from a distance. He would track her steps, from the school where she taught to the market where she bought groceries, studying her mundane routines just to feel a fleeting connection. It was a pathetic, solitary existence. Suddenly, in the hospital bed, the memories began to warp. The image of Siyerra smiling at the market began to fold in on itself. Soo-hyun's face distorted. The flashback was collapsing, shattering like a broken mirror, replaced by an urgent, terrifying pressure building in his chest. The monitor beside Min Jun's bed didn't just beep, it began to shriek. The dull ache of his broken ribs was instantly eclipsed by a crushing, suffocating weight on his heart. He gasped, his back arching off the mattress as his vision tunneled into darkness. A blood clot, dislodged from the severe trauma of the accident, had found its way to his heart. It was a mild, yet potentially fatal, attack. Chaos erupted. Doctors and nurses flooded the room, their voices a blurred cacophony of medical jargon. Code Blue. Get the crash cart. Push 1 milligram of epinephrine. Hands pressed against him, wires were attached, and the frantic fight to tether his soul to his body began. For a few agonizing hours, Min Jun hovered on the precipice between life and the void. By dawn, the medical team's desperate efforts paid off. His rhythm stabilized. He was pulled back from the brink, alive, but utterly exhausted. 2 floors below, in a room devoid of panic, a different kind of tragedy was quietly unfolding. Siyerra opened her eyes. The harsh fluorescent light made her blink. The heavy bandages wrapped around her head felt foreign and restrictive. She looked around the sterile room, her gaze devoid of the vibrant empathy that usually defined her. Sitting in the chair beside her bed was her mother, weeping silently, her hands clutching a rosary. "Mom?" Siyerra croaked, her throat dry and raspy. Her mother gasped, rushing forward to kiss her daughter's bruised forehead. "Oh, my sweet girl. You're awake. You're finally awake." A doctor stepped into the room, shining a small light into Siyerra's eyes. "Siyerra, do you know where you are? Do you know what year it is?" Siyerra frowned, a deep, unsettling emptiness echoing in her mind. "A hospital. I don't know the year. Was I in an accident?" "You were," the doctor said gently. "Do you remember anything about it? Do you remember your husband, Harry?" Siyerra stared blankly at the doctor, then at her sobbing mother. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not out of grief, but out of profound, terrifying confusion. "Who is Harry?" she whispered. The accident had stolen more than just lives on the bridge, it had wiped Siyerra's canvas clean. The brilliant teacher, the fiercely loyal wife, the love story that had defined her, it was all gone. She remembered her mother, and nothing else. The beautiful life she had built was locked away behind an impenetrable wall, leaving her adrift in a sea of nothingness. The heavy sedatives that saved Min Jun's heart could not save his mind. As his physical body stabilized in the quiet, dim hospital room, his subconscious dragged him back to the very night his life, and the lives of 3 others, was destroyed. The fragmented memories that had haunted him finally locked into a horrifying, seamless sequence. It had been raining. He remembered standing under the dripping awning of a high-end Italian restaurant. Through the warm, golden glow of the glass, he had watched them. Harry and Siyerra were sharing a dessert, their faces close, illuminated by candlelight and an effortless, radiant joy. Harry had whispered something that made Siyerra throw her head back in laughter, her hand reaching out to squeeze his. The sight had been a physical blow to Min Jun. The deep, agonizing realization that he would never be the reason for that smile had ignited a dark, reckless fury within him. He had fled to a private lounge, ordering bottle after bottle of whiskey. The memory sharpened, bringing the desperate, tear-stained face of Soo-hyun into focus. She had tracked him down, as she always did. "Min Jun, please stop," she had begged, grabbing his arm as he signaled for another glass. "You're destroying yourself over something that was never yours. Let her go. Let me take you home." But his heart was hard, walled off by jealousy and the lifelong ache of unreturned love. He had shaken her off roughly, his vision swimming. Refusing her offer to call a driver, he had marched out into the torrential rain, his mind clouded by a toxic cocktail of alcohol and heartbreak. Soo-hyun, terrified for his safety, had climbed into the passenger seat, refusing to let him drive alone. In the hospital bed, a silent scream tore at Min Jun's throat as the final, devastating truth clicked into place. He was the careless drunk driver on the news. He had taken the wheel with anger in his heart, pressing the pedal to the floor, blindly navigating the slick roads of the Mapo Bridge. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted to hurt Siyerra, or Harry, and especially not Soo-hyun. But his selfish, unbridled agony had turned his car into a weapon. He was the architect of his own nightmare. In a room down the hall, the silence was suffocating. Siyerra sat propped up against her pillows, staring at the blank, beige wall. She closed her eyes, squeezing them shut until sparks danced behind her eyelids, desperately trying to summon a face, a voice, a feeling. Harry. The nurses and doctors kept saying that name. Your husband, Harry. But no matter how hard she reached into the dark void of her mind, her fingers grasped nothing. There was no wedding day, no laughter in a classroom, no gentle hands comforting her. The harder she tried to force the memories, the more her head pounded, wrapping her brain in an agonizing vice. Exhausted and defeated, she let out a frustrated sob, her hands trembling as she tangled her fingers into the coarse hospital sheets. It was terrifying to know that a massive piece of her soul had been amputated, leaving no scar, only a terrifying numbness. Sitting in the corner of the room, Siyerra's mother watched her daughter weep for a man she could no longer remember. While Siyerra's mind was empty, her mother's heart was filled to the brim with a boiling, toxic rage. She knew exactly who was in the other car. The police had visited. She knew about Min Jun, the spoiled, arrogant billionaire who had relentlessly pursued her married daughter, who had tried to buy Harry off with a check, and who had ultimately climbed behind the wheel of a car-blind drunk. He had taken everything. He had killed Harry, the kind-hearted orphan who had loved her daughter with unparalleled devotion. And worse, he had killed the Siyerra that used to be. The bright, empathetic teacher was gone, replaced by this fragile, frightened stranger. As Siyerra's mother looked out the hospital window toward the VIP wing where the Jun conglomerate's heir was being coddled, her hands balled into tight fists. Min Jun had ruined her daughter's life, and she swore to whatever gods were listening that he would not walk away from this unpunished. The road to physical recovery was a grueling, agonizing crawl. For months, the hospital was their entire world, though they existed in entirely separate orbits. Min Jun's shattered leg required 3 surgeries, and his crushed ribs made every breath a conscious effort. He threw himself into physical therapy with a punishing intensity, treating the excruciating pain as a necessary penance. As his bones knitted back together, a new, unbreakable resolve hardened in his mind. He loved Siyerra, he loved her with a depth that terrified him, but his love was a poison that destroyed everything it touched. He had cost her a husband. He had cost Soo-hyun her life. When the doctors finally cleared him for discharge, he stood at the exit of the hospital, leaning heavily on a sleek, black cane. His assistant waited by the idling car. Min Jun cast one long, final look up at the windows of the neurological wing where Siyerra remained. "We are not coming back here," Min Jun said, his voice stripped of the playful warmth that had once defined him. It was cold, hollow, and absolute. He promised himself, in the silent depths of his fractured heart, that he would never cross her path again. He would not check on her, he would not send flowers, and he would not watch her from the shadows. To protect her, he had to become a ghost. If his proximity guaranteed destruction, then his absence would be his greatest act of love. The Jun conglomerate had suffered in the wake of the scandal. Stocks had plummeted, investors were nervous, and vultures circled the seemingly broken air. But the man who returned to the executive penthouse was not the boy who had left it. Min Jun buried his trauma under towering stacks of contracts and endless board meetings. He rebuilt his empire with a ruthless, calculated efficiency. The adorable, charming CEO was dead, replaced by a stoic, untouchable titan of industry. He worked until his eyes burned and his healed bones ached, using exhaustion as a shield against his own memories. He desperately wanted to erase Siyerra from his mind, believing that holding on to her image would eventually tempt him to break his vow of distance. He drew strict, uncrossable boundaries within his own company. He delegated the entire educational foundation to a trusted board of directors, explicitly barring himself from receiving any updates regarding the academies. He never once visited the school where she had taught. Min Jun built an iron fortress around his life. He lived by a single, tragic philosophy: anyone who got near him would surely get hurt. He chose to walk away from the trauma, locking the ghost of the man he used to be inside the twisted metal on the Mapo Bridge. On the other side of the city, Siyerra's physical wounds eventually faded into pale, quiet scars. But her mind remained a vast, white canvas. The memories of her past, her marriage, and the tragedy were locked behind a door she simply could not open. Her mother was fiercely protective, hovering over her with anxious, tearful eyes, shielding Siyerra from the truth of the accident and the identity of the man who caused it. But as the seasons changed, the suffocating safety of her mother's apartment became unbearable. Siyerra felt a hollow ache in her chest, a desperate need to find a purpose in a life that felt like it belonged to a stranger. "I need to do something, Mom," Siyerra said one morning, looking at a stack of classified ads. "I can't just sit here. I need to work. I feel like I'm supposed to be helping people. Teaching, maybe." Her mother had stiffened, terror flashing in her eyes, but she knew she could not keep her daughter in a cage forever. Guided by a profound, inexplicable instinct, Siyerra began to search for teaching positions. She didn't know why she was drawn to literature, or why the idea of standing in front of a classroom felt like the only anchor in her floating existence. Days of searching led her to a job opening for an academy in the heart of the city. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Siyerra walked up to the sprawling, ivy-covered gates of the school. A strange shiver ran down her spine as her shoes clicked against the cobblestone courtyard. She paused under the shade of a large weeping willow, a fleeting, phantom warmth brushing against her heart. She didn't know that this was the exact spot where a billionaire had once fallen in love with her laugh. She didn't know that the academy was a subsidiary of the Jun conglomerate. Without a single memory to guide her, fate had seamlessly closed the loop, dropping Siyerra right back at the beginning. The interview panel sat in stunned silence. When Siyerra had walked into the principal's office, the collective gasp in the room was palpable. They remembered the vibrant, newlywed teacher who had left months ago, only to be swallowed by a horrific tragedy that made the evening news. Yet, here she stood, poised, polite, and completely unaware of the ghost she was summoning in their minds. Though the accident had wiped her personal history clean, the profound depths of her academic education remained remarkably intact. The university lectures she had absorbed, the pedagogical theories she had mastered, and her innate understanding of child psychology flowed from her lips with effortless grace. It was the muscle memory of the mind. She couldn't remember her own husband's face, but she could brilliantly articulate how to de-escalate a student in crisis. Despite the obvious shock of the administration, Siyerra decided to accept the position. Walking through the halls felt like reading a book in a language she had forgotten but still somehow understood. The true anchor in her strange new reality, however, was the students. Her old pupils recognized her immediately. They didn't care about her memory loss, they only remembered the warmth she had given them when they were struggling. They became her guides, gently reminding her where the staff room was, helping her organize her desk, and showing her the same boundless empathy she had once shown them. In the shelter of their youthful kindness, Siyerra slowly began to breathe again. Weeks bled into months, the crisp autumn air giving way to the biting cold of winter. The academy was buzzing with frantic energy as the prestigious golden anniversary of the school's founding approached. In the towering glass citadel of the Jun conglomerate, Min Jun stared blankly at the gilded invitation on his desk. He had spent months fortifying the iron walls around his heart, transforming into a man his employees feared. He was notoriously cold, sharp-tongued, and entirely dismissive, especially toward women who tried to bridge the gap his trauma had created. But the ice in his veins was only a shield; beneath it, the agonizing, undying love for Siyerra still burned like a hidden ember. Through the unavoidable whispers of his executive board, Min Jun had learned the impossible truth: Siyerra had returned to the academy. The very thought of her being there tore at his carefully constructed sanity. He had initially refused to attend the ceremony, terrified that seeing her would shatter him all over again. But the academy was his late father's crowning philanthropic achievement. Skipping the golden anniversary would be a public insult to the memory of the man who had raised him with everything but a mother's touch. Swallowing the bitter taste of dread, Min Jun finally, reluctantly, confirmed his attendance. Meanwhile, Siyerra was oblivious to the impending storm. She had been tasked with spearheading the entire anniversary event. From coordinating student performances to selecting the catering menus and arranging the floral decors, she threw herself into the work. It gave her a sense of control in a life that still felt terrifyingly untethered. The day of the anniversary arrived, cloaking the school's grand auditorium in velvet and gold. When Min Jun stepped out of his chauffeured car, the air around him seemed to freeze. He wore a sharply tailored, jet-black suit that mirrored the darkness in his eyes, his hair styled in a cold, icy sweep that exposed the sharp, unforgiving angles of his face. The principal and the school management bowed deeply, scrambling to welcome the formidable CEO as he walked through the double doors, his expression an unreadable mask of indifference. Inside the auditorium, chaos was barely being managed. Up in the technical balcony overlooking the VIP walkway, Siyerra was hurriedly whispering instructions to a nervous student holding a massive, rigged basket of white and red rose petals. "Just wait for the cue, okay?" Siyerra instructed gently, adjusting the rope. "When the music swells, you pull this." But the student's hands were slick with nervous sweat. The rope slipped. Down below, as Min Jun was being escorted to his velvet-lined guest seat, a sudden, rushing sound echoed from above. Before anyone could react, the heavy basket tipped, breaking from its hinges and plummeting toward the floor. It missed Min Jun by mere inches, but the impact sent an explosive shower of thousands of rose petals over him, covering his immaculate black suit in a chaotic flurry of red and white. The entire hall fell dead silent. Min Jun's icy facade cracked into absolute fury. He brushed a petal from his shoulder, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, dark rage as he glared up at the balcony to find the source of the humiliating disruption. "Who is responsible for this?" he snapped, his voice a low, terrifying growl that made the principal flinch. He looked up. Standing at the edge of the balcony, her hands covering her mouth in horror, was Siyerra. The soft auditorium lights caught the terrified, yet fiercely beautiful contours of her face. She wore a simple, elegant dress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Min Jun's breath caught in his throat. The fury evaporated, replaced by a sudden, violent shock that pinned his boots to the floor. His heart, which he had sworn was dead and buried, hammered violently against his ribs. She didn't look like a ghost. She looked prettier, more radiant, and more deeply ingrained in his soul than the very first day he had seen her. And as she stared down at the angry, handsome stranger in the black suit, Siyerra felt a strange, inexplicable ache flutter in her empty mind. For 3 agonizing seconds, time stood still under the shower of falling petals. Min Jun's eyes locked onto Siyerra's, his carefully constructed world teetering on the edge of total collapse. Every instinct screamed at him to run up the stairs, to pull her into his arms, to beg for a forgiveness she didn't even know he needed. But then, the brutal reality of the Mapo Bridge flashed in his mind. The twisted metal. The blood. He was a curse. With a monumental effort that nearly shattered his soul, Min Jun slammed his iron vault shut. The vulnerability vanished from his eyes, replaced instantly by a glacial, terrifying emptiness. He broke eye contact, sharply brushing a red petal from his lapel. "See to it that the technical crew is replaced by tomorrow," Min Jun said to the trembling principal, his voice echoing with dismissive coldness. He didn't look up at the balcony again. He turned on his heel and walked toward the VIP lounge, leaving a bewildered and breathless Siyerra staring at his retreating back. An hour later, the tension had relocated to the principal's opulent office. Min Jun sat across from the senior staff, his demeanor strictly professional. They discussed the academy's metrics, the funding, and a new initiative to elevate the school's prestige. "The academic pressure on these students is mounting," the principal noted, nervously adjusting his glasses. "We need a holistic approach. I propose a comprehensive counseling and skill-building program. Something to manage their personal and academic stress, to help them navigate their conflicts." Min Jun nodded curtly. "A sound investment. Draft the budget and finalize the curriculum. The board will approve it. Who do you have in mind to lead it?" "Actually, we have the perfect candidate right here," the principal smiled, clearly relieved to have good news. "Miss Siyerra. She recently rejoined us, but her grasp on student psychology and conflict resolution is unparalleled. The students already adore her. As the coordinator, she would report directly to the Jun conglomerate's educational board." "No." The word cracked through the room like a whip. Min Jun's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. If Siyerra became the coordinator, she would have to attend board meetings. She would be in his building. She would be in his orbit. He would have to see her, hear her voice, and face the agonizing temptation of his own love every single month. "Sir," the principal stammered, confused. "I said no," Min Jun repeated, his tone leaving zero room for debate. "Find someone else. I will not have her leading this program. If you cannot find a suitable alternative, I will cancel the funding for the initiative entirely." The principal swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Of course, Mr. Lee. As you wish. We will look for external candidates immediately." Just outside the slightly ajar door, Siyerra froze. She had come to the office holding a written apology for the petal incident, ready to take full responsibility to protect her student. Instead, she had walked into a blatant, unprovoked career sabotage. A hot, unfamiliar spark of indignation ignited in her chest. She had no memories, but her core personality, her fierce intolerance for injustice, was still fiercely alive. Why would this arrogant, terrifying CEO, a man she had never met before today, specifically veto her for a job she was perfectly qualified for? It wasn't just unfair, it was personal. As Min Jun swept out of the office, his assistant trailing behind him, he was suddenly forced to halt. Standing dead center in the hallway, blocking his path to the exit, was Siyerra. Her dark eyes were blazing with a righteous, furious fire that he recognized instantly. It was the exact same look she had given him the day she found out he tried to buy her husband. "Excuse me, Mr. Lee," Siyerra said, her voice ringing clear and steady in the quiet corridor. She didn't shrink under his towering, icy glare. "I believe you owe me an explanation." Min Jun's assistant stepped forward, scandalized. "Miss, you cannot just approach the CEO." "It's fine," Min Jun interrupted softly, though his heart was threatening to break through his ribcage. He looked down at her, forcing his expression into a mask of pure apathy. "An explanation for what, exactly?" "For rejecting me as the program coordinator without so much as glancing at my file," Siyerra challenged, stepping closer. "If my qualifications are lacking, tell me. If this is about the accident with the petals, I take full responsibility." But to deny me a position that could help these students out of sheer, unexplained spite? That is an injustice I will not stay silent for. Why are you avoiding me, Mr. Lee? Min Jun stared at the beautiful, angry woman standing before him. She was demanding answers for a crime she didn't know the half of. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He was avoiding her to save her life, but right now, looking into her fierce, unyielding eyes, he knew walking away was going to be the hardest battle he had ever fought. Face to face with the woman who held his soul, his defenses crumbled to dust. He could not reject her. He could not hurl harsh words at her when she stood there, entirely innocent, entirely devoid of the tragic memories that haunted his every waking moment. The selfish, desperate part of his heart, the part that had starved for her presence, suddenly roared to life. If she was the coordinator, she would have to report to the board. He would get to see her. Just once a month. A controlled, professional glimpse to soothe his aching soul. Min Jun let out a slow, controlled breath, the tension leaving his broad shoulders. Your qualifications were not in the file provided to me, Miss Siyerra, he lied smoothly, his voice dropping its icy edge, replacing it with a calm, resonant timbre. I do not fund projects blindly. However, your passion for this program is evident. If you are willing to take on the responsibility, the position is yours. Siyerra blinked, the fire in her eyes shifting into profound surprise. It is? It is, he affirmed quietly. Submit your preliminary curriculum to my assistant by Friday. He walked away before she could see the crack in his facade. But that single concession was the breach in the dam. As the weeks turned into months, the monthly board meetings became the anchor of Min Jun's existence. The heavy, suffocating walls he had built around himself began to dismantle, brick by brick. While he maintained a strict, professional distance, simply being in the same room as Siyerra brought a profound, unfamiliar peace to his chaotic mind. Slowly, the old Lee Min Jun began to stir from his long, self-imposed exile. When Siyerra presented her progress, a faint, boyish smirk would occasionally tug at the corner of his mouth. He would catch himself offering a playful, albeit subdued, remark about the school's eccentric art teacher, or leaning in with genuine, unguarded interest when she spoke about a student's breakthrough. He was coming back to life, even if he tried his hardest to hide it from her. Siyerra was falling. She was falling helplessly, devastatingly, and she couldn't find the ground. It wasn't his staggering wealth that captivated her, nor the sharp, handsome lines of his face that graced the covers of business magazines. She was falling for him because of the spaces in between their conversations. She was falling for him because of the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It happened during the third board meeting. Siyerra had dropped her laser pointer and bent to retrieve it. When she sat back up, glancing toward the head of the table, she caught him. Min Jun's gaze was fixed on her, and it stripped the breath right out of her lungs. It wasn't the look of a cold, calculating CEO. It was a gaze so intensely vulnerable, so impossibly deep and yearning, that it felt like a physical touch. It was the most romantic, sorrowful gesture she had ever witnessed, a look from a man who was pouring all the love in his heart into a single, silent stare. The moment he realized she was looking, his walls slammed back down, and he averted his eyes. But Siyerra had seen it. And from that day on, she was consumed by the need to know the man behind the ice. She began tailoring excuses just to see him. A minor budget discrepancy that could have been handled over email suddenly required her to visit the Jun conglomerate tower in person. A question about the curriculum necessitated a quick drop-in to his office. She wore her favorite dresses, she let her laughter ring freely when he made one of his rare, dry jokes, she leaned in closer when she handed him reports, leaving the faint scent of her vanilla perfume in his space. But for Min Jun, every smile she offered, every lingering touch of her hand against his when passing a document, triggered a war in his mind. He noticed her signs. He saw the blush on her cheeks and the way her eyes tracked his lips when he spoke. But his trauma formed an impenetrable barrier between them. She doesn't know, he reminded himself daily, his heart fracturing as he deliberately took a step back from her advances. If she remembered the bridge, if she remembered her husband, she would look at me with disgust, not love. He convinced himself that her affection was just a symptom of her memory loss, a fragile illusion that would shatter the moment the truth came out. And so, Min Jun played the fool. He politely ignored her lingering glances. He stepped away when she stood too close. He kept his hands firmly in his pockets, absorbing the agony of rejecting the only woman he had ever loved, believing with every fiber of his being that breaking her heart now was the only way to save her life. In the quiet solitude of her bedroom, bathed in the cool, blue glow of her laptop screen, Siyerra was acting like a schoolgirl with her very first crush. The tabs on her browser were a testament to her undeniable obsession: articles about the Jun conglomerate, red carpet photos from charity galas, and candid shots of Min Jun looking impossibly handsome in his tailored suits. She propped her chin on her hands, a soft, dreamy smile playing on her lips as she studied the sharp line of his jaw and the hidden depths in his dark eyes. Her imagination ran wild, painting vibrant pictures over the blank canvas of her memory. What if I married a man like him? She wondered, her heart fluttering at the thought. She imagined the cold, untouchable CEO melting in the privacy of their home, treating her with a fierce, protective tenderness. She could almost feel his hands holding hers, his deep voice whispering her name. She was so hopelessly lost in her romantic daydream that she didn't hear the bedroom door creak open. Her mother stepped in, carrying a basket of folded laundry. "Siyerra, sweetie, I washed your..." The words died in her throat. The laundry basket slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud as her eyes locked onto the laptop screen. There, staring back at her in high definition, was the face that haunted her nightmares. The arrogant billionaire who had tried to buy her son-in-law. The drunk driver who had shattered her daughter's mind and stolen Harry's life. A pure, violent rage surged through her blood, so potent it made her vision blur and her hands shake uncontrollably. "Siyerra." Her mother breathed, her voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of horror and fury. "Who the hell are you staring at?" Siyerra jumped, slamming the laptop shut, her cheeks burning crimson. "Mom. It's nothing, I was just looking up the CEO of the school's foundation." "I know this man," her mother interrupted, stepping forward, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. He is a devil." "How do you know him?" Siyerra stuttered, bewildered and frightened by her mother's intense reaction. He's my boss, essentially. I coordinate the new program for him." "Mom, you're scaring me. Why are you calling him a devil? What are you talking about?" Her mother opened her mouth, the devastating truth resting right on the tip of her tongue. She wanted to scream Harry's name. She wanted to tell Siyerra about the twisted metal on the Mapo Bridge. But looking into her daughter's fragile, confused eyes, she couldn't do it. The doctors had warned her that a forced traumatic recall could cause permanent psychological damage. "Just stay away from him," her mother choked out, tears of helpless anger pooling in her eyes. She turned and fled the room, unable to provide an answer. But as she marched down the hallway, her sorrow hardened into a sharp, unyielding resolve. She was not going to let that monster destroy her daughter's life twice. She had to stop him. The top floor of the Jun conglomerate tower was silent and intimidating, but Siyerra's mother marched past the glass doors with the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose. When the heavy oak doors to the CEO's office swung open, Min Jun was standing behind his desk. The moment he recognized the older woman, the blood drained from his face. The untouchable titan of industry instantly vanished. He rounded the desk, stopping a few feet away, and bowed deeply, respectfully, holding the posture as a wave of unbearable guilt washed over him. "Mrs. Parker," he said softly, his voice thick with remorse. "Do not say that name," she hissed, her voice venomous. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with raw hatred. "I saw my daughter looking at your photos. I know she works at your school. I don't know what sick, twisted game you are playing, Min Jun, but it ends today. You took her husband. You took her mind. If you have a single shred of humanity left in your black heart, you will stay away from her." Min Jun stood frozen. Her words were daggers, plunging into wounds that had never healed. He was being rejected again, cast out like a pariah. Why? A small, broken part of him cried out. Why must I be punished forever for a mistake I would die to take back? But he knew she was right. He was a danger to Siyerra. I understand, he whispered, his eyes dropping to the floor. I swear to you, I will not go near her again. True to his word, Min Jun vanished from Siyerra's life. He transferred the program's oversight to a subordinate. He stopped attending the monthly board meetings. He became a ghost. But his sudden, unexplained absence had the opposite effect on Siyerra. She had fallen so hard that the sudden distance felt like a physical starvation. Her days became gray, filled with a restless, aching anxiety. She couldn't function without seeing him. She needed to hear his voice, to figure out why he had suddenly shut her out when she had felt the undeniable pull between them. She waited for him. One evening, after the corporate offices had emptied out, Siyerra stood in the shadows of the executive parking garage. She saw him walking briskly toward his car, his head down, clearly trying to slip away unnoticed. Panic and longing seized her. She ran across the concrete, her heels clicking loudly in the echoing space. Min Jun, she called out. He froze, his back stiffening, but he didn't turn around. He took another step toward his car, trying to hide from the one thing he wanted most in the world. Siyerra didn't let him. She caught up to him, her hands grabbing his arm, holding him in place with a desperate, surprising strength. Why are you running from me? She demanded, her voice echoing in the empty garage. Tears were streaming down her face, stripping away all her professional pride. She couldn't hold it in anymore, the feelings were too vast, too overwhelming. Let me go, Siyerra, he pleaded, his voice cracking, his eyes squeezed shut because he knew if he looked at her, he would be lost. No, she shouted, her voice loud, bouncing off the concrete pillars. I won't let you go. I don't care about your walls or your money. I love you, Min Jun. I love you so much it hurts. The words struck him with the force of a freight train. I love you. It was the phrase he had literally killed for, the phrase he had sacrificed his soul to hear, and now, hearing it from the lips of the woman whose life he had ruined, the sheer, crushing weight of his guilt and his love was too much to bear. His armor shattered completely. Min Jun's breath hitched in his throat. His knees, trembling violently under the weight of his sins and his broken heart, gave way entirely. He collapsed to the cold concrete floor, falling to his knees right in front of Siyerra, a broken king bowing before the woman he could never allow himself to have. The cold concrete of the parking garage bit into Min Jun's knees, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony tearing his soul apart. Looking up at Siyerra's tear-stained, desperate face, the dam broke. The iron fortress he had built around his sins finally crumbled, and the horrifying truth poured out in a ragged, breathless confession. You can't love me, Siyerra, he choked out, his voice raw with unshed tears. You don't know what I did. You don't know who I am. He told her everything. He spoke of the day he first saw her laughing under the willow tree, and how his obsession had grown into a toxic, consuming fire. He confessed to the arrogant, cruel proposal, the check he had slid across the table to her husband, Harry, and her furious rejection. And finally, with his head bowed in absolute shame, he recounted the rainy night on the Mapo Bridge. He told her about the alcohol, the blinding jealousy, and the collision that had taken Harry's life, killed his best friend Soo-hyun, and shattered Siyerra's mind. Siyerra stood paralyzed, the words washing over her like freezing water. The sheer magnitude of the tragedy was too vast, too horrifying to comprehend. Harry. A husband she loved. A life violently stolen. She raised her trembling hands to her temples, pressing her palms hard against her skull. She wanted to squeeze her head, to violently force the memories out from the dark void. Remember. She screamed in her mind. Remember him. Remember the bridge. But the void remained silent. There was no husband's face, no echo of a crash, no righteous anger. There was only the crushing, suffocating reality that the man kneeling before her, the man she had hopelessly, entirely fallen in love with, was the architect of her forgotten ruin. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. A sudden, blinding panic seized her chest. Unable to breathe, unable to process the collision of a past she couldn't remember and a present she couldn't escape, Siyerra turned on her heel and ran. She sprinted blindly out of the dark garage and into the chaotic, rain-slicked streets of the city, desperate to outrun a truth she couldn't even feel. Siyerra! Min Jun's terrified scream echoed through the night as he scrambled to his feet. He chased after her, his heart hammering against his ribs in a frantic rhythm of pure terror. Tears blurred Siyerra's vision as she ran onto the busy intersection, oblivious to the flashing lights and the blaring horns. The blinding headlights of an oncoming car illuminated her frozen, tear-streaked face. The screech of tires on wet asphalt pierced the air, a horrifying echo of a past she couldn't remember. In a fraction of a second, a strong arm wrapped around her waist. Min Jun collided with her, grabbing her as lightly as a feather, and pulled her forcefully back onto the safety of the sidewalk just as the car sped past, missing them by inches. They collapsed onto the wet pavement together, chests heaving. Min Jun pulled her into his lap, his large hands frantically cupping her face. He was shaking uncontrollably, entirely broken by the thought of losing her again. Without a word, he pulled her to him, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her eyelids, her temples, kissing everywhere his lips could reach, as if trying to physically breathe life and safety back into her trembling body. "I'm sorry," he sobbed against her skin. "I'm so sorry, Siyerra. I love you. I'm a monster, but I love you." Siyerra cried, her tears mixing with the city rain. Her mind was a battlefield, but as she felt the desperate, protective warmth of his body and the profound, agonizing love in his touch, the war ended. The past belonged to a ghost. Harry was a story she had been told, but Min Jun was the reality she could feel. "The past is the past," she wept, her voice breaking as she threw her arms around his neck, holding him impossibly tight. "I don't know that life, Min Jun. I only know this one. I only know you. And I can't live without you." She didn't let him argue. She pulled his face down to hers and kissed him desperately, pouring all her fear, forgiveness, and overwhelming love into the embrace. In the rain-soaked street, surrounded by the chaos of the city, they clung to each other, two broken pieces finally fitting perfectly together. The garden of the coastal estate was bathed in the soft, golden light of late spring. It was a small, intimate ceremony, a stark contrast to the grand, extravagant life the June conglomerate usually demanded. There were no press, no board members, just a quiet celebration of survival and second chances. Siyerra looked breathtaking in a simple, elegant white gown, her radiant smile outshining the blooming cherry blossoms. Standing at the altar, Min Jun looked at his bride, his dark eyes no longer hollow or cold, but filled with a profound, unshakable peace. In the front row, Siyerra's mother watched them exchange rings. It had taken time, endless tears, and countless difficult conversations for her to even look at Min Jun without seeing the tragedy of the bridge. But over the past year, she had watched him love her daughter. She had seen him worship the ground Siyerra walked on, protecting her with a devotion that bordered on reverence. He had dedicated his entire life to making up for the one he took. As Min Jun gently kissed his wife, wiping a happy tear from her cheek, Siyerra's mother finally exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She understood their love now. It was born from destruction, but it had grown into something beautifully, undeniably pure. When the ceremony ended and the newlyweds walked down the aisle, Siyerra's mother stepped forward. She looked at Min Jun, who immediately tensed with respectful apprehension, and then she looked at her daughter's glowing face. She reached out and took both of their hands. "You protect her," she said to Min Jun, her voice quiet but firm. "You give her the world." "I will," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "For the rest of my life." Siyerra's mother smiled softly, finally letting go of her hatred. "Then I wish you both all the luck and happiness in the world." Hand in hand, Min Jun and Siyerra walked into their new beginning, leaving the shadows of the past behind them, stepping entirely into the light. Did Min Jun and Siyerra's tragic and beautiful love story capture your heart? If you love emotional roller coasters, billionaire romance, and K-drama inspired stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven Min Jun like Siyerra did? Like, comment, and share to support the channel, and stay tuned for our next heart-stopping story.